Anyway, I'm Marcy Campos, and I'm the director of the Center for Community Engagement and Service. And we're very, very pleased. Supposedly we had 27 people sign up for this, so that's kind of an all-time high. We've done this workshop several years in a row, usually in person. One point it was 2 days, and it went to 1 day, and now we're going to do it in 3.5 hours. So great to have you here. And we'll move to the slide of the facilitators, and we'll do some brief introductions. Isn't there yeah, thank you. So as I said, I'm the director of CSES, and I also teach a community-based learning course once a year in the fall called the Latino Community of the DC Metropolitan Area. And now I'll pass it to Everett.
Hi, everybody. My name is Everett Finger. I am the program coordinator for community-based learning within the CSES office. So I actually help run the CB courses as well as the community service learning program and some of the one-day service events.
Great, thanks. Amanda.
And I'm Amanda Chowka. I'm a senior professorial lecturer in the Writing Studies program, and I also teach a community-based learning complex problems class.
Great. And our guest facilitator, Gemma Puglisi. Gemma, you got to unmute.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm Gemma Puglisi. Thanks for having me, Marcy and Everett. I'm the assistant professor in the School of Communication, and I teach a PR portfolio class where we work with a lot of nonprofits. And I've been the lucky faculty fellow for the community, the Center for Community Engagement and Service the past 2 years. So thank you for including me today.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick rundown of what the agenda is going to look like, and then we're actually going to do an activity so we can find out who's here. So this is our little mini agenda. I know I sent it out, but we definitely want to have this be interactive and hear from you and know what you want to learn. So we're kind of in one of those dilemmas where we want to do everything, and we'll do our best under this new kind of format. But we have seen the evolution of community-based learning grow and the interest grow over the 15 years I've been at AU. So we're very excited that with the new strategic plan and so many faculty who have such a commitment to the city, we've been able to see this approach to teaching and learning develop. We'll talk more about it in a few minutes, but we are really, really pleased that so many people have chosen to be a part of this session. And I know a bunch of you and a lot of you are already very involved in the community, so it'll be great to be sharing ideas and innovations and things like that. So the agenda is in front of you. I won't read through it, but I do want to let you know that the PowerPoint will be available after the presentation. And there's tons of materials that we sent out to read. They're also, I guess, on the CTRL, whatever it is, Blackboard or wherever they post it. Basically, as questions evolve, sometimes there'll be a chance for the discussion during the session, but always go to the chat and name anything that you're concerned about or that you have a question about. If we can't get to it today, we promise you we will follow up. So that's that. I'm going to pass it now to Amanda and Everett for our welcoming activity.
All right. So we are going to place people into breakout rooms for 8 to 10 minutes. We are also going to copy and paste the questions that you should be working on those breakout rooms into the chat. Everett, if you could do that now, that would be lovely. So in your breakout room, you're going to share your name, your department, what course you want to teach that might incorporate community-based learning. And number 2, you have an option. What do you hope to learn the most today? Or what is one concern you have about implementing community-based learning? All right. So we're coming back to the presentation, and we're hoping one person from each group can briefly report out what you all talked about for number 2. So what are people in your group hoping to learn, or what is one concern they have about implementing community-based learning?
I can start. I was group with Susan. Is that Susan? Am I pronouncing Susanna? Susanna. And
Yeah,
Caroline. And then Joan. I think we Joanne asked because she's from China, and she actually don't know what community community-based learning is about. Very foundational question. So we are just talking about that. And then I think we raised a lot of question about how, like feasibility. I'm talking about the question too. Feasibility, logistics, like schedule, like how we grade. Because a lot of community project, we have to go somewhere. How that possible when other students usually are busy with all other classes, and we have to fit in the time frame. So if we go somewhere, it's kind of hard. And then if we ask some assignment, a lot of students don't have extra time, or just like the schedule doesn't work. How that possible? And then it's really about the scheduling and then grading.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. All right. Does another group want to share?
This is Gemma. I'll go ahead and share. I had two great people in my group. It was small, but it was great. And it was Yang Mei and Susan, and they were both professors in our law school, which was fabulous. And I think they both are very, very interested in what the community-based learning class is, because they really, frankly, are already doing that. They work with the community every day. As Susan was saying, they have a clinic that they work with, as does Yang Mei. And I think they do a lot of work with their students who already are helping the community, whether it's family services, succession, whatever it might be. The challenges are that because it is law school, there are, and some of them are clinics, there are obligations that students have to follow as law students. And so that, I think, is a challenge for them as well. And I hope Susan was saying it very eloquently, and then we ran out of time, but just that there are some practicum classes that they do teach. But I think because it is law school and there are certain challenges, that it's a little bit hard to maneuver. Susan, did you want to add anything else? Did I forget anything?
No, I think that's fine. Thank you. It's,
Okay, and Yang Mei, is there anything you wanted to add that I may have forgotten?
No, it's very good of you.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Cool. Thank you, Gemma.
Mhm.
All right. Would another group like to report out? Other Susan. Susan Ehrenreich, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I always go by Susie, so there's
Susie,
a
got it.
distinction between the Susan and the Susie. Anyway, there's 3 wonderful people in the group, and most of them are new to community-based learning. Ralph was just interested in learning more about what's going on, and please correct me if I misquote you. And another person, I'm in specs, MJ's in specs with me, and the last person, I'm terrible with names, so I don't want to botch her name, but she was interested in learning more about teaching Spanish in the DC community. And I'm a repeat offender. Marcy and I go way back. So I've been actually incorporating community-based learning in my mostly intercultural understanding class. This is for 8 years. And what I'm interested in getting out of the workshop is, in this new virtual world, figuring out how to connect to DC-based nonprofits virtually when students aren't really allowed to go out into the community.
Lovely. I think that is the question on many of our minds these days. All right. And then I believe we have one more group. Someone from the last group volunteered to introduce your group members and report out on number 2. What do you hope to learn, or what are you concerned about?
Hi, my name is Amy, and I work in the School of Professional Extended Studies. Hey, Susie. Hey, Jason. In my group, we had specs, but also CIS and languages and an environmental studies person. And in our group, we all came really with this similar feeling of the shared experience of wanting to connect to what's real and what's happening in DC and get some very clear strategies and advice from this group. Whether we were a video game designer / teacher of foreign languages, or teaching an oceanography class, or something else in the environmental realm, or internships and specs, the common thread was trying to find ways to make the teaching practices relevant. Of course, we shared the stories of the struggles too, of the way that we're trying to develop concepts in the COVID-19 world, many of us with working with children at home, and the benefits as well as the challenges that presents. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Amy. So I think that was all the groups now. And let's keep going. Marcy or Everett, do you want to add anything here before we move on?
I would just add, and I think it'll become apparent, I think there are like kind of 2 levels to the discussion. One is sort of what are the basics of community-based learning? What does it look like? How do you find community partners? What does reciprocity mean? And then the second level is like, if in the fall we can't do it the way we really want to do it, which is in person, what would it look like remotely? And I don't think we're going to be able to address that today. 1, because it's more complicated, and 2, I feel like we should start with the basics and hope that if not in the fall, by January, we'll be back out in the city. So I would just say I'm very open to working on like a second workshop that deals with remote CBL, but I don't think we are ready to do that today. Do my co-presenters agree with me?
Agreed. We talked several times about possibly refocusing this workshop to focus on those options, but at the same time, the university is still learning about what remote community-based learning options are, because literally nonprofits and community-based partners are still figuring that out as they speak. I mean, I went from having 2 in-person community-based learning classes this semester to teaching those online, and only 5 students opted to continue doing the community-based learning option because nonprofits were adapting, as we all were in the last couple of months. They didn't have the infrastructure yet. They were still figuring out what they needed. So I think actually we'll have more answers by fall. So I think a follow-up on remote CBL could make sense maybe for the August CTRL workshops. But we do not have answers on that one today. So I'm just going to be totally transparent there. And I am sorry, but it's still emerging. So.
Okay, so now we are actually on what is community-based learning? So this is a very simple slide. And again, as I said, you'll all get these in the end. But community-based learning is also known as service learning. Some campuses use that term more than others. And it's definitely based on the idea that there can be a mutually beneficial relationship between students and community partners, which are either schools or nonprofits, and that we want to deepen the students' learning through the experiential applied experience. So on the one hand, students get to think about reading about things in theory, that sounds interesting, but by being immersed in some kind of community experience, that learning takes new levels and is deepening and the learning, and at the same time, it is addressing some kind of community issue. So it's beneficial to both sides of the equation, the student and the nonprofit or the government agency or wherever they're working. So that's why this whole idea of reciprocity is super important. It's not just, we are going to give students an experience they can put on their resume. It's really about, let's set up conditions so that it works for both. And because many of us who've worked in the nonprofit sector know that nonprofits are often struggling, often they can't do everything they want to do. Students are often added value. They know certain things, they're good on social media. And so we want to tap into the students' skills, but we also want to make sure that students are respectful and want to learn about the community issues and the neighborhood and the nonprofit. So all those are the conditions we try and set up in order to have community-based learning be meaningful. So it's not just go out and like fill out a little log and you did your 20 or 40 hours. It's really about doing it in a meaningful way and planning it and make sure all the stakeholders have a voice. Anybody want to add anything to that?
I think this is the one thing we especially have to keep in mind if the university does transition to doing remote CBL classes in the fall, this idea of reciprocity and the students adding value to the nonprofit and supporting their needs. That's the challenge right now. Because nonprofits are still figuring out what their needs are right now and what their infrastructure can support. So I think this is something to keep in mind, especially if people are imagining what this could look like remotely. It's often training students how to use another online platform. So this is something that we all really have to be careful of, the university not just taking from already overworked tax nonprofits who are also adjusting to life at home. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, but also I would add one last thing to this. And although I think it can be really taxing and frustrating at times to kind of think of how we could do this in a virtual sense, but I think one of the best parts of community-based learning is the opportunity to be innovative and kind of that entrepreneurial spirit that goes along with it, and being able to really tailor a course and service experience to community-based learning. And so I think in some ways, this is also the perfect opportunity for us to get really creative about really engaging with students in a way that, you know, they would hope to have kind of that classic academic experience, even though they may not get that in person. So there is also, I think, a positive side to it as well, which is really exciting.
Okay, next slide. So we are part of a national trend. We're not doing this alone. There are over 1,000 campuses around the country that are involved in community-based learning. Some of them, as I said, called service learning. We belong to this great organization called Campus Compact, and at the end we'll give you their website. They have great resources. They have syllabi, they have readings, they have trainings. And I think this is interesting. The pictures are going over my second column, but so I think one of the arguments we often want to use and use at AU is that this is considered a high impact practice, that it has so many advantages for our students, and especially with this generation where they have debt around college. And it contributes both towards kind of career readiness, because you're getting your foot in the door by being involved in the community, kind of like an internship, but with a little bit of difference, but also because it encourages collaboration, which is so beneficial for student body. It applies, you know, the theory to real life situations. And the term I keep reading when I look at the whole issue of retention is persistence and retention in college. So the engagement, the leadership opportunities, the hands-on application really keeps students engaged, because it gives them purpose. It gives meaning to a lot of the stuff they're learning in classrooms. So I think I have a whole page, and I can also upload that, of studies that talk about how different kinds of community engaged learning contribute towards retention. And as we all know, that's what colleges want. They want students to stick it out and finish, whether it's in 4 years or 5 years, stay in school and finish their degrees. So I think we have to keep articulating to the leadership that these experiences are really powerful and impactful, obviously for the nonprofit as well as the student, but that students who get involved really have added meaning to their academic experience. Everett? Oh, is this you or me? Sorry, isn't it Everett?
I could do it. Yeah. So I guess Marcy just basically framed kind of the context surrounding AU's work. And I think something to keep in mind is, like she was saying, this is not just something happening on our campus. It's, you know, a field of study that's really blowing up all across the country, especially in the current political climate and state where, you know, community is being questioned on a daily basis. And so this slide right here that you see is just AU's strategic plan, which really emphasizes working with Washington. You know, it's really just a way of them stating that experiential learning, research, and, you know, applying scholarship to really important policy questions is something that AU does really well, that, you know, we're working on partnering really closely with District of Columbia and just really on efforts kind of to improve kind of that relationship we have with local community partners. The CSUS office worked with over 273 community partners just from my experience, and I've only been working at AU since August, which is pretty exciting, and that's in a bunch of different programs that we'll speak about here shortly. You know, and the nice part is our office alone, because we are at the forefront of that community engagement and scholarship, works with over 500 plus students in just one of our programs alone, which is Explore DC, an orientation event. So the nice part is not only are we kind of seeing that national context, we're also seeing AU really try to put a focus on this within the, you know, our academic field of study. And then that leads us to our next slide, which is kind of CBL Learning Models at AU. I'll touch a little bit on the first three. Obviously, I'll give a brief overview, and if anyone needs more information, definitely please reach out afterwards. But the first one is Community Service Learning Program, so CSLP. So this is a 1 credit add-on option. So what students are allowed to do is in any of their courses that they take during a semester, they're able to add on 1 credit to a course. So it would go from a 3 credit course to, say, a 4 credit class, as long as they can find a service or volunteer opportunity that connects to the course content. And then that's kind of the service learning model that has the course content experience, the service learning experience, and then the reflection experience, which is really important in CB learning, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. It is about 40 hours of community service throughout the semester, so about 3 hours per week. This semester as well, we even had 10 students finish the CSLP program, even though we turned virtual, which was really exciting. The second opportunity is the CB courses, which is what this whole workshop is kind of all about. And then lastly, we have the Eagle Endowment. And this is all housed inside the Center for Community Engagement and Service, CSUS, Marcy and I's office. The Eagle Endowment are grants that students are able to apply for, which then they can take that grant money to help fund a project for the students while working with a community partner.
Okay, and then finally, as many of you know, there are departments or programs, could you go back a sec, within AU that have community-based learning as fundamental to fulfilling the requirements of the program and fulfilling the mission of the program. So some of you probably know Jane Palmer, who runs a community-based research scholars, and that's basically every fall about 40 students come in. It's a living learning community. They've been selected because they have shown in high school like a strong interest in community service, and they have to take a number of courses together that are either CB courses or have community-based learning component. And the second semester, they actually do a community-based research project with a community agency that is identified in advance. And There's also a certificate that other students, even if you weren't in that program during your freshman year, because that's kind of just a one-year program, there is a 15-credit certificate program called Community-Based Research Certificate. And later on, if you want more information, we can definitely share that with you. But it's great as you get to know students along their undergraduate path, and you see that they have a strong interest in this. It's kind of nice. You graduate with your BA degree, and you also can get this certificate. Similarly, Public Health Scholars is a 3-year program. Students go through the year and in the summer, and they have several courses that are considered community-based courses. And at least, I think one semester they have to go abroad. And I know that in Kenya, you can actually do community-based learning there too. So those are just two that I know of that are focused on the community-based learning. Thanks. The second slide is just a little bit about the community-based research scholars, but we can pass through that.
Okay, so this slide, Marcy and I are talking about the 8 criteria for a CB course. It's interesting, I don't think all faculty and students realize that courses do need to meet these 8 criteria. The courses are evaluated in the syllabus and materials by the Community-Based Faculty Advisory Board, which is run out of Marcy's office. Marcy, I don't know if you want to add a sentence or two there.
We basically ask a couple of months ahead of the semester faculty members to go online and say, this is the course I would like to convert into a CB course. These are the 8 criteria. And then basically we ask you to send us your draft syllabus. Yeah. So we'd like you to just look at these 8 items. And I had sent around also this little handout, thinking you could possibly, as you listen, if you're really thinking about doing this for sometime next year, think about what you might do in each of the categories. So the first one is the entire class is involved versus the model that Everett spoke about where it's just individuals who do the add-on credit. Reciprocity, we talked about, has to be beneficial for both sides. So in a CB course, it's either 20 hours or a project. And we'll talk more about that later, but it's not, 40 hours would be very unrealistic for most of our students. As some people pointed out, our students are just so busy. So we ask for 20 hours minimum, although some do many more, or some kind of project or product you do for the nonprofit. We talk about preparation of students to work in the community and be responsible, and Amanda will be talking about that in a bit. Different activities are included for reflection. Academic credit is given for assignments, not just for clicking a box that said you do service. And co-learning is really important, that we're learning from each other. We kind of avoid this kind of hierarchical teaching model, but we really think of learning from each other and often bringing in people in the community or going into the community and learning in their spaces also. And then there are some pieces of assessment that are critical. But if you can, I don't know if you can see my form, if you did get it and you can use it in some way, I think jotting down notes throughout the session about what you might do as you hear from different speakers would be helpful. If not, of course, you can do it later on. Thanks. Anything you want to add, Amanda or Everett or Gemma?
I think the thing to emphasize here is, while it looks like a really prescriptive list of what is required for a CBL course, there's actually a lot of flexibility here, depending on your discipline, depending on your audience of students, depending on your course requirements, depending on your academic content.
Yeah.
I think what we really want to emphasize here is the flexibility and the options that faculty have available to them. So for instance, in my writing 101 course that usually first year students take in their second semester, instead of 20 hours of service, we do 20 hours, we do 15 hours and a service project, which then helps me connect some of the writing specific learning outcomes to the service project. In my complex problems class, which is generally first and second year students, they do 20 hours of service, but they have more reflection exercises. So again, come back to what works for your class, what is the goal here learning outcome wise, and figure out a way to meet those criteria depending on what you're doing. So any questions so far? Because I know we've been talking at you a lot.
As
Yes.
people look at the list, any resonate with you? That would be particularly hard, or that would be absolutely necessary for my class?
Was that Louise?
Question. I don't know if you guys. Yes, I have a very bad connection.
Louise, if you
So
want to,
that's why.
if you want to type your question in the chat too.
Yeah. So if your opinion, the best way in terms of curriculum design, first a list of organizations that you would be, or would you develop your curriculum not caring about your organizations and then you identify them?
Okay.
Okay.
Louise, so we missed about 90% of that. So if you want to retype your question in the chat, but I think it's something about how do you find organizations? Is that right?
No, not quite.
Not quite. Okay. If you want to type your question in the chat, and then we can take it. I think it depends on the class. So Louise's question is, what would you recommend in terms of curriculum design? A bottom-up model, identifying organizations first, and then designing the curriculum. I think it's an excellent question. I think look at the class first, and then, or curriculum first, and then identifying organizations. I think looking at the class first, and what are your learning outcomes? Because essentially, all of us still need to meet the learning outcomes for the course. And especially if we think about things like reappointment and promotion, I hate to bring it up, but our academic units do care about that. And I think then looking at the class and then organizations would be helpful. I have some examples. That's actually the next slide or two. But we're gonna get more into the weeds with this. This is kind of the exciting stuff, at least to me, about this. So, all right. So here are some examples. So this is more of there are kind of 3 models of CBL type classes. I generally do this first model, direct service examples. So I teach mostly first or second year students in the writing studies program or in complex problems. So both classes are introducing our students to these ideas of academic inquiry and the academy, but they both have very different learning outcomes. So the types of service that I found work well, especially with first year students or second year students, transfers also generally thrive in these classes. Horton's Kids, it's a tutoring and mentoring program. They have a community resource center in Anacostia. They also have an office located at LaFont Plaza. They've been a community partner of mine for 9 years. And I was actually their first intern in 2005, and I used to work for the organization. So I'm really familiar with what they do. They've been incredibly supportive of AU and community-based learning. They've even hired former AU students as interns and staff post-graduation. So they are very familiar with the challenges of student schedules and are flexible with working with students. And I can't say enough about them as a positive community partner. Another organization that I'm a big fan of, Thrive DC. They're a meal assistance program for the homeless population. Their office is in the basement of a church on 16th Street in North Columbia Heights. The students can do things like help out at the meals. They can do office work. They do front desk administrative support. One example of a service project I've linked here. So if you're following along the PowerPoint, all of the links on my slides will take you either to the organization's website or their information on volunteering or example projects. So for instance, students in the picture to the right, they wanted to organize Thrive DC's in-kind donation room, which was, as they said, a bit of a hot mess at the beginning. So they applied actually for an Eagle Endowment grant and then spent the next several weeks once they got the grant organizing the room. Thrive DC has admitted this is something that has to be redone pretty much every spring because they just get so many donations and the staff does not have time to organize it on a daily basis, but the student volunteers make it possible to organize in-kind donations. Another organization that I'm a big fan of, DC Reads. So generally, students that sign up for CBL classes worry about the time commitment. And if you have a federal work study job or you need to work while you're in college, this is a real factor that makes community-based learning unattainable for some students. The DC Reads is federal work study approved. Marcy can explain that a little bit more, but it lets students who are using that for federal work study still get a credit for doing a CB class.
Yeah, so just to chime in there,
yeah,
if we have 5 different sites for DC Reads that are all nonprofit agencies, if it's a good match for your class, and obviously it isn't for every class, students can both get paid because federal work study job pays like $14 or $15 an hour, and they can be doing their service hours. And Luis, just so you know, some of the sites have mostly Latino kids, like Latin American Youth Center. Sometimes we partnered with Centronia. So your students could actually work there and also be, you know, using some of their translation or interpretation skills.
Thank you.
Same for Tatovic.
So on this slide, this is top picture. Matt, the volunteer manager for Horton's Kids, is giving my students from Complex Problems and students who opted to from Writing 101 an orientation to the Horton's Kids Community Resource Center space. As you can tell, it is in Wellington Park in Anacostia. The Wellington Park community that Horton's Kids serves, Horton's Kids has served the community for over 30 years. The average family income is $10,000 a year. It is 98% single mothers. It is 100% African American and Black. The families of Wellington Park are facing some extreme challenges that our students are not familiar with. So we do a whole Complex Problems. Our first co-curricular of the year is we do a trip out there on a Saturday morning. So we all meet at the Kogai bus stop and we practice doing the shuttle to the red line, to the green line, and then taking a bus to Wellington Park. So it's a time commitment. We've made that trip sometimes in 45 minutes one way. This last spring, we did not get lucky and it took an hour and 20 minutes. So at least doing it the first time with your students, if you can, if you have options built into your class like Complex Problems, you are required to have 3 co-curriculars. And it's a co-curricular in the first 2 weeks of class that gets the students familiar with the work that they'll be doing in the class. So then the bottom picture are students from Doing Better at Doing Good last fall. It was taken during tutoring time. You see how different the space is with the children in it. Students have said that they really like getting to know the space and learning it before the kids are in the space, because having 40 small children attempting to do homework, I think all of you who are stuck at home with children right now, just use your imagination and it gets a little hectic. Any questions here? You see there's some stuff popping up in the chat. Okay, so for instance, with Complex Problems, Hazen has a question. How can you provide some examples of how these experiences relate to specific course learning goals? So one, that first co-curricular, it's required for Complex Problems. They should have some kind of academic experience outside of the classroom that connects the academic learning to the community in some way. So we're doing this trip together so they get familiar with the commute. It's a little bit different, and it's an area of DC that honestly, most of our AU students will probably not visit in their 4 years in DC. As one young woman said last semester, I didn't even know what Anacostia was. It's not something that's popped up on my Instagram feed. So that is the kind of attitude that we're honestly dealing with. So we do the commute together. They get a tour of the resource center. They learn where all the supplies are. They learn what goes on in different spaces in the community center. So for instance, the children aren't allowed food in that back room that's in the top picture because the food gets distracting. There are food allergies. And if you're trying to focus on learning, that's not really the place that they want that to happen. But in the front room where they can more socialize, have snacks, that sort of thing, that's perfectly okay. Complex Problems, also one of the learning outcomes is diverse perspectives. So while they're learning from the community of the diverse perspectives of Anacostia, we're also reading different articles, Ibram X. Kendi, Melody Hobson. We're using different kinds of texts, talking about what is diversity, what is inclusion, and anti-racism. because if I'm sending predominantly white students from a PWI to a majority Black community, I have a lot of work to do there. So I have some suggested texts on a later slide, but I think, again, if you think about what is your course, what are the learning outcomes, how can you prepare your students for community-based learning well, it will lead to generally better experiences for your students and the community. And I can't stress that enough, because I think especially earlier forms of community-based learning have prioritized student experiences over the community. And that's really what we want to avoid. Any other questions right now? Got it. MJ, I'm writing that down. I can come back to that. We're all struggling with that virtual community-based learning aspect. Okay. I think this next slide is Gemma.
No, it's me. It's me.
Okay, slide. Got it.
So as I mentioned, I teach every fall a course called the Latino Community of the DC Metropolitan Area. And I ask all of my students, usually about 20, to get involved in an issue that they care about rather than me set up the sites ahead of time. So there was one year, it wasn't this past fall, but the one before, where a group called DC Doors was very popular, and I had like 5 students working there. It's in Shaw neighborhood. It's a small office, but it provides workshops, training, preparation for families that are either homeless or in transitional housing, so their lives are very unstable. One of the cool things was that the director is Jeanette Pena, who is an AU alum, so she had like a real strong commitment to AU students having a positive experience. And my students would do a variety of things with this organization. If you go to the next slide, I can show you some examples. So some of them would actually go in on Saturday mornings and lead different kinds of workshops that the director and the staff thought were important. So I sat in one day and they were leading workshops about interview skills or writing your resume. They also actually interviewed people who came in as clients. They helped with social media and visuals and website stuff. And I do remember one particular student who was helping a man who was in public housing, but it was based on his wife's particular background and situation. And they lost the public housing because she died. And this student did a great job advocating and writing letters and getting legal support. And the man eventually was able to stay in the housing that his wife had been entitled to, but he might have lost. So DC Doors is just one example of an issue that students felt very committed to. Any of you who got to watch that video that we sent around, Rashawn Thomas was the student who was interviewed, and this is where he worked, and it was like a very, very powerful experience. Again, this is what the direct service looks like, and we can talk about a whole bunch more different examples. So any questions? And from anybody? Oh, this video didn't work. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. We will resend it so it doesn't require, someone else told me that. I'm sorry about that. We thought it was on a YouTube video, so it should have been accessible.
Videos do not work in PowerPoint and Zoom as far as I can tell from online teaching this spring. But someone from CTRL might be able to help us troubleshoot that.
Mm-hmm. But we can also resend it and make sure it's accessible. I did send it last Friday night, but we'll figure out why you couldn't get onto it, and you can watch it later, hopefully.
Yep.
Any other questions about direct service in particular?
Okay, let's keep chugging.
Okay.
All right, now I think this is Gemma's slide.
This is me. Hi, everybody. So I wanted to just share with you how you can think outside the box in terms of some of these classes that are community-based classes. I'm trying to get to the next slide, and it's not letting me for some reason. Okay, thank you. So the first question is, how do you find clients if you want to teach these community-based classes? And the first thing is, So many of us have taught many students, and many students have had some great experiences, whether it's been their internships or volunteering. And so I try to do as much correspondence as possible with former students who've taken this class to get ideas of clients. A few years ago, a former student's mother reached out to me because she was in charge of a nonprofit, and we were able to help the company that she was working for. So looking out at former students or reaching out to former students is a big deal. Another way to find clients is to look at issues that are so important and what organizations are working really hard to make a difference. Obviously, if it's homelessness, if it's poverty, if it's hunger, if it's the environment, look at those issues. You will find organizations that you would be able to reach out to where students would find them really inspiring and feel like they'll make a difference. The other way to find clients is just read the news. That is how some of my earlier classes started really in community-based learning, was looking out and reading what was out there and people or that were in need of help. And the other thing that's really important is think outside the box. And I'll share in a couple of minutes a Do Better campaign that we did this semester, just basically letting you know that last year I had a student who took this class. He was a member of the class of 2018, and he died of a rare blood disease last August. And he was very outgoing at American University. And so I reached out to his parents to see if there was anything that we could do. And they came up with some great suggestions, that when he was a little boy, he had to go to the children's hospital all the time to get transfusions. So they wanted us to work with the Children's Care Network. He gave, he needed blood to survive. And so we wanted to have a blood drive on campus. He was very active in a fraternity. So we were able to reach out to fraternities and sororities to see what we could do to remember him. So these are just some of the things to think outside the box to work on a community-based class. Okay, the next slide. So this is, I'll talk about that in a second, but this was the Do Better campaign. Here's my former student who passed away. And the idea of the Do Better campaign came across his parents. I reached out to his parents when I knew I wanted to dedicate a class to him. And his parents said, well, Steve's life was just telling people they should do better. And so that's what we decided to do. We decided to call our campaign, and I teach a PR class. So community-based learning goes a long way. I mean, you could do it in a law school, you can do it in a public relations class, you can do it in a business class. So we were able to work on getting the word out about Steve's life and his legacy by telling people to do better, whether it was volunteering with other organizations, making a difference. The next slide is how do you work with clients? So this is really important, or nonprofits. Very important to let the client understand everything up front. They have to, for me, it's important for them to be at the first class and definitely at the very final class, because the students work really hard for 16 weeks and spend a lot of time and effort. In public relations, how we measure things is how many people we've reached out to and we've had an impact. But at the end of my presentations for students, we actually do this. As PR practitioners, we bill per hour, just like lawyers do. I have students hypothetically say to the client, okay, it's been great working with you for 16 weeks. If we had to bill you, and the average amount of money that students start out with in PR firms is $100. So what we do is we say to the client, if we had to bill you, we were 21 students, 16 weeks, the going rate's $100 an hour. Literally, we would bill the client generally about at least almost $250,000. That's a lot of money. That's $250,000. That's how much the worth is monetarily if we did it, because we're our practitioners. We have to show that. But at the same token, of course, the whole idea is to work with these clients to help them understand how important it is. It's being reciprocative, I can't think. And that is important for us, and leaving the legacy and making a difference. The importance of how to work with them is also to emphasize the structure of the class. We don't want 20 students to be calling the nonprofit every day or every week. We have students broken up into teams or co-team members, and they will contact the client. And then the last thing is, it's very important to speak up if you have issues or concerns. And believe me, they always come up. No matter how many times I say, everything's fine, I have everything set up before the semester starts, we always have issues. And the case in point was the pandemic that we're dealing with right now. Okay, the next slide. So I want to get back to Steve just really quickly because, it's thinking outside the box of how you can help the community. So we were ready to have a great blood drive with the American Red Cross, which took us almost 3 months to plan. It took me 50 seconds to end it, or basically to cancel it because of the pandemic. And so the students had to think quickly on their feet. We were going to have a trivia night at a local bar. We were going to have we were going to raise money, and the money we were going to raise, the students decided to go to healthcare workers in DC. So that had to be canceled because 6 weeks out, we couldn't do it. So the students decided to do it virtually. And this is maybe will answer some of your questions later. If we go back to school and it's all online, this will not deter you. You can still have a community-based class by doing interesting work. And I found that the students were even more passionate than they were when we were in a class physically. So basically, we had a trivia night online. The students were able to raise a lot of money. And then the next slide is we were going to have musicians perform at our, not the DAV, but the bridge. We were going to have a music night, and you can't see the slide because all the pictures of all of us are on the right-hand side, but you'll see 2 of the students on the right side and some of the artists that appeared. And so we dedicated us over an hour or so in having musicians come and talk. And the students did such an incredible job. We did this all online. And then the next slide. We also wanted, the parents said to us that it would be really great to have something to memorialize their son at American University, whether it was, a plaque or whatever it could be. And we still are, even though the students are gone, there are still things that are in the works. One of them is Steve had an internship with an AU alum at a PR firm, and we're trying to get a fellowship ready for him on that, and we're still working on that. But the one thing we really thought we would do to surprise the family was to have every year, as you all know, students give awards out. I mean, the university gives awards out to students. We went to the provost, and the students wrote this letter asking if there was any way starting next year they can name a scholarship with Steve's name, Steve Camarata. And I'm telling you, it was down to the finish line. My class, you'll see there it says April 21st. My class was April 22nd. On April 21st, the provost sent a letter saying he's very enthusiastic about doing this. He just has to meet with everybody over the summer with the other members of the university to put it through. But he said to let everybody know he enthusiastically supports it. So we were very excited to show this to the parents. And then the final slide is we raised $2,000. And all of this was done pretty much online after the pandemic. And so we asked the parents, this is how you help the community, right? We asked the parents where they thought the money should go. And they said they wanted it to go to the ICU unit. I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional now. But this is to go to the ICU unit that took care of Steve during his last days at Georgetown University. And so we did it all on Venmo. And then I transferred the money to my checking account. We did a check, had it overnighted to Georgetown University, and the students were able to raise $2,000. So we got a beautiful letter from them thanking us for the students doing a great job and for remembering their son. So thank you for letting me share an interesting and very different and original way of handling a community-based class.
Thank you, Gemma. I think that's an excellent way to show how a slightly different discipline
Right.
approaches this, and how it's, if you think creatively, it's actually really feasible, I think, to connect learning outcomes
Right.
to a CB class.
I just want to chime in because I've had the honor of going to Gemma's end of semester presentations for many years now, and they really stick with me how professional they are. And by having, and again, this is unique to her class, having the partners present at kind of a presentation / reception, it is very emotional. It's very, very powerful because they are getting projects and products that on their own, they probably would never be able to do. So the students really develop professionally, and that's so clear during those presentations. But I mean, I can remember ones you did 10, 12 years ago that were just beautifully done. And I think what's unique, obviously, is your talent and skills at doing this, but the kinds of projects have varied a lot, and students have just plunged in and done a fantastic job. So obviously, anybody who is thinking about project-based work, you would be a great resource for them to communicate with you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm happy to help anybody, you know, if you have any ideas. But, you know, it's just, I don't want to take much time, but it's really thinking outside the box and literally canceling all these events and not being able to do them. And you're seeing the work that the students can really do and still work with the community in a different way. So it's sometimes it's even more powerful.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked first about what direct service looks like. We've talked about the project-based work. And then just very briefly, I want to touch on what community-based research is. I don't know if anybody has either done that who's attending today or is thinking of that. But would someone be willing to read out loud? Turn off your mic and read this definition of community-based research just to get some other voices on here. Volunteers? All right. All right. Community-based participatory research is a collaborative research approach that is designed to ensure and establish structures for participation by communities affected by issue being studied, representatives of organizations and research in all aspects of the research process to, is that the improve? I can't quite see it there.
Improve.
Yeah, health and well-being through taking action, including social change. So as I mentioned before, we can go to the next slide, students enter this program and they take a bunch of fall courses together, a lab, and then a CB course that here is listed on the slide. And they have to do a minimum of 20 hours during the fall semester. And then in the second semester, next slide, they do a research project that is the actual community-based research. So they kind of learn about what this collaborative approach to research would be. The person teaching it, sometimes there's two sections, you know, designs it with an organization, because it has to be obviously done collaboratively and with that organization in mind, whether it's going to be qualitative or quantitative research. And then the students actually plunge in and do that project, do that research, and then they share it out, and the organization gets the results. And some organizations don't have researchers on staff, so they really, really benefit from some of these projects. And the next slide just has a listing of some of the organizations that in the past have benefited from this. But I know that Jane Palmer, who runs the program, works closely in this case with setting up those organizations in advance, because it does take time from the staff member. So you have to have an organization where they're willing to give the time to the students and to thinking through the details of these research projects.
I think this is where the list of community-based organizations that Marcy has later in the program makes sense. They're sort of vetted organizations. Other faculty have worked with them before. The CSIS office has a relationship. Some of us have relationships with them over years. I think there can be some research and cold calling and that sort of thing. But I think especially depending on what age your student is, I think especially for the younger students, if the organization is familiar with CBL and how different it is for college students to volunteer than, say, an adult, that's a good idea. Any questions right now?
I think we have a poll next, right?
Believe so. All right. So Lindsay is going to start the poll. And you're not committing to an answer. I mean, this is what you're thinking right now, but no one is keeping track of this for later on. There's a question in the chat. Oh, got it. Thank you, Everett.
And while everyone's also filling out the poll, just if you go into the chat, I also just put a link. I know we did not talk about virtual service, and I know that is not something that we're really going to focus on. But our office is creating a list of virtual service opportunities, kind of nationwide and in DC. So these are opportunities that we're consistently updating. And you can find that on our homepage as well as kind of in the link I sent you. And I'll make sure that we also put that website in the resources in the PowerPoint before we send that out to you all as well.
Has everyone who is not a facilitator had a chance to participate in the poll? All right, Lindsay, I think we can end the poll then and share the results. I like the diversity here. Okay, so it looks like 50% of people, no, that's not right. This is what happens when the writing person tries to math things in their head. 5 people want to do direct service, 3 people want to do project-based, and 4 people want to do community-based research. Beautiful. Okay. We're going to keep going. Oh, that was the before of the room at Thrive DC that my students organized a couple years ago. You can see why they needed an Eagle Endowment grant to get the equipment to organize the room. Okay. So this next part of the presentation.
I think this is where we built in our 10-minute break.
Yes. So we're going to give everyone a stretch, run to the bathroom, grab more coffee, check on the kids, whatever you need to do. We're thinking exactly, right, Luis? We're thinking about 10 minutes here. Cool?
Good?
All right.